Chapter 10. School. Back in the 1960s, when she had money, which was hardly ever, Mommy would take us down to Delancey Street on Manhattan's Lower East Side to shop for school clothes. "You have to go where the deals are," she said. "They won't come to you." "Where are the deals?" we asked. "The Jews have the deals." I thought Jews were something that was in the Bible. I'd heard about them in Sunday school through Jesus and such. I told Ma I didn't know they were still around. "Oh, they're around," she said. She had a funny look on her face. The Hasidic Jewish merchants in their black yarmulkes would stare in shock as Mommy walked in, trailed by 5 or 6 of us. When they recovered enough to make money, she would drive them to the wall, haggling them to death, lapsing into Yiddish when the going got tough. "I know what's happening here. I know what's happening," she snapped when the merchants lapsed into Yiddish amongst themselves during negotiations over a pair of shoes. She angrily whipped off some gibberish, and the merchants gawked even more. We were awed. The first time it happened, we asked, "Ma, how'd you learn to talk like that?" "Mind your own business," she said. "Never ask questions or your mind will end up like a rock. Some of these Jews can't stand you." Looking back, I realized that I never felt any kinetic relationship to Jews. We were insulated from their world and any other world but our own. Yet there was a part of me that recognized Jews as slightly different from other white folks, partly through information gleaned from Mommy, who consciously and unconsciously sought many things Jewish, and partly through my elder siblings. My sister Rosetta's college education at the all-black Howard University was completely paid for, tuition, books, even school clothes, by the Joseph L. Fisher Foundation, which was run out of the Stephen Wise Free Synagogue of Manhattan. In addition, my oldest brother, Dennis, guru of wisdom and source of much of our worldly news in the 1960s, came home from college with respect for Jewish friends he'd met. "They support the civil rights movement," he reported. Mommy was for anything involving the improvement of our education and condition, and while she would be quick to point out that some Jews can't stand you, she also, in her crazy, contradictory way, communicated to us the sense that if we were lucky enough to come across the right Jew in our travels, a teacher, a cop, a merchant, he would be kinder than other white folks. She never spoke about Jewish people as white. She spoke about them as Jews, which made them somehow different. It was a feeling every single one of us took into adulthood, that Jews were different from white people somehow. Later, as an adult, when I heard folks talk of the love-hate relationship between blacks and Jews, I understood it to the bone, not because of any outside sociological study, but because of my own experience with Jewish teachers and classmates, some who were truly kind, genuine, and sensitive, others who could not hide their distaste for my black face. People I'd met during my own contacts with the Jewish world, which Mommy tacitly arranged by forcing every one of us to go to predominantly Jewish public schools. It was in her sense of education, more than any other, that Mommy conveyed her Jewishness to us. She admired the way Jewish parents raised their children to be scholastic standouts, insulating them from a potentially harmful and dangerous public school system by clustering together within certain communities to attend certain schools, to be taught by certain teachers who enforced discipline and encouraged learning, and she followed their lead. During the school year, she gave us careful instructions to bring home every single paper that the teachers handed out at school, especially in January, and failure to follow these instructions resulted in severe beatings. When we dutifully arrived with the papers, she would pore over them carefully, searching, "Okay, here it is," grabbing the little form and filling it out. Every year, the mighty bureaucratic dinosaur known as the New York City public school system would belch forth a tiny diamond. They slipped a little notice to parents, giving them the opportunity to have their kids bused to different school districts if they wanted. But there was a limited time to enroll, a short window of opportunity that lasted for only a few days. Mommy stood poised over that option like a hawk. She invariably chose predominantly Jewish public schools, PS 138 in Rosedale, JHS 231 in Springfield Gardens, Benjamin Cardozo, Francis Lewis, Forest Hills, Music and Art. Every morning we hit the door at 6:30, fanning out across the city like soldiers, armed with books, T-squares, musical instruments, an S-bus pass that allowed you to ride the bus and subway for a nickel, and a free school lunch coupon in our pocket. Even the tiniest of us knew the subway and local city bus schedules and routes by heart. The number 3 bus lets you off at the corner, but the 3A turns, so you have to get off. By age 12, I was traveling an hour and a half one way to junior high school by myself, taking 2 buses each direction every day. My homeroom teacher, Miss Allison, a young white woman with glasses who generally ignored me, would shrug as I walked in 10 minutes late, apologizing about a delayed bus. The white kids stared at me in the cafeteria as I gobbled down the horrible school lunch. Who cared? It was all I had to eat. In this pre-busing era, my siblings and I were unlike most kids in our neighborhood, traveling miles and miles to largely white, Jewish communities to attend school, while our friends walked to the neighborhood school. We grew accustomed to being the only Black, or Negro, in school, and were standout students, neat and well-mannered, despite the racist attitudes of many of our teachers, who were happy to knock our 95 test scores down to 85s and 80s over the most trivial mistakes. Being the token Negro was something I was never entirely comfortable with. I was the only Black kid in my 5th grade class at PS 138 in the all-white enclave of Rosedale, Queens, and one afternoon as the teacher dutifully read aloud from our history books one page on Negro history, someone in the back of the class whispered, "James is a nigger," followed by a ripple of tittering and giggling across the room. The teacher shushed him and glared, but the damage had been done. I felt the blood rush to my face and sank low in my chair, seething inside, yet I did nothing. I imagined what my siblings would have done. They would have gone wild. They would have found that punk and bum-rushed him. They never would have allowed anyone to call them a nigger. But I was not them. I was shy and passive and quiet, and only later did the anger bursting out of me, roaring out of me with such blast furnace force that I would wonder who that person was and where it all came from. Music arrived in my life around that time, and books. I would disappear inside whole worlds comprised of Gulliver's Travels, Shane, and books by Beverly Cleary. I took piano and clarinet lessons in school, often squirreling myself away in some corner with my clarinet to practice, wandering away in Tchaikovsky or John Philip Sousa, trying to improvise like jazz saxophonist James Moody, only to blink back to reality an hour or two later. To further escape from painful reality, I created an imaginary world for myself. I believed my true self was a boy who lived in the mirror. I'd lock myself in the bathroom and spend long hours playing with him. He looked just like me. I'd stare at him, kiss him, make faces at him, and order him around. Unlike my siblings, he had no opinions. He would listen to me. "If I'm here and you're me, how can you be there at the same time?" I'd ask. He'd shrug and smile. I'd shout at him, abuse him verbally. "Give me an answer," I'd snarl. I would turn to leave, but when I wheeled around, he was always there, waiting for me. I had an ache inside, a longing, but I didn't know where it came from or why I had it. The boy in the mirror, he didn't seem to have an ache. He was free. He never was hungry. He had his own bed, probably, and his mother was not white. I hated him. "Go away," I'd shout. "Hurry up, get on out," but he'd never leave. My siblings would hold their ears to the bathroom door as I talked to myself. "What a doofus you are," my brother Richie snickered. Even though my siblings called me Big Head because I had a big head and a skinny body, to the outer world I was probably on the most likely to succeed list. I was a smart kid. I read a lot, I played music well, I went to church. I had what Black folks called good hair because it was curly as opposed to nappy. I was light-skinned or brown-skinned, and girls thought I was cute despite my shyness. Yet I myself had no idea who I was. I loved my mother, yet looked nothing like her. Neither did I look like the role models in my life, my stepfather, my godparents, other relatives, all of whom were Black. And they looked nothing like the other heroes I saw, the guys in the movies, white men like Steve McQueen and Paul Newman who beat the bad guys and in the end got the pretty girl, who incidentally was always white. One afternoon I came home from school and cornered Mommy while she was cooking dinner. "Ma, what's a tragic mulatto?" I asked. Anger flashed across her face like lightning, and her nose, which tends to redden and swell in anger, blew up like a balloon. "Where did you hear that?" she asked. "Just a book I read." "For God's sake, you're no tragic mulatto. What book is this?" "Just a book I read." "Don't read that book anymore." She sucked her teeth. "Tragic mulatto. What a stupid thing to call somebody. Somebody called you that?" "No." "Don't ever, ever use that term." "Am I black or white?" "You're a human being," she snapped. "Educate yourself or you'll be a nobody." "Will I be a black nobody or just a nobody?" "If you're a nobody," she said dryly, "it doesn't matter what color you are." "That doesn't make sense," I said. She sighed and sat down. "I bet you never heard the joke about the teacher and the beans," she said. I shook my head. "The teacher says to the class, 'Tell us about different kinds of beans.' The first little boy says, 'There's pinto beans.' 'Correct,' says the teacher. Another boy raises his hand. 'There's lima beans.' 'Very good,' says the teacher. Then a little girl in the back raises her hand and says, 'We're all human beings.' She laughed. 'That's what you are, a human being, and a fart buster to boot.' She got up and went back to cooking while I wandered away, bewildered. Perplexed to the point of bursting, I took the question to my elder siblings. Although each had drawn from the same bowl of crazy logic Mommy served up, none seemed to share my own confusion. "Are we black or white?" I asked my brother David one day. "I'm black," said David, sporting his freshly grown afro the size of Milwaukee. "But you may be a Negro. You better check with Billy upstairs." I approached Billy, but before I could open my mouth, he asked, "Want to see something?" "Sure," I said. He led me through our house, past Mommy, who was absorbed in changing diapers, past a pile of upended chairs, books, music stands, and musical instruments that constituted the living room, up the stairs into the boys' bedroom, and over to a closet which was filled, literally, from floor to ceiling with junk. He stuck his head inside, pointed to the back, and said, "Look at this." When I stuck my head in, he shoved me in from behind and slammed the door, holding it shut. "Hey, man, it's dark in here," I shouted, banging at the door and trying to keep the fear out of my voice. Suddenly, in the darkness, I felt hands grabbing me and heard a monster roar. My panic zoomed into high-level terror, and I frantically pounded on the door with all my might, screaming in a high-pitched, fervent squawk, "Billy!" He released the door, and I tore out of the closet, my brother David tumbling out behind me. My two brothers fell to the floor laughing, while I ran around the house crying for Ma, zooming from room to room, my circuits blown. The question of race was like the power of the moon in my house. It's what made the river flow, the ocean swell, and the tide rise, but it was a silent power, intractable, indomitable, indisputable, and thus completely ignorable. Mommy kept us at a frantic living pace that left no time for the problem. We thrived on thought, books, music, and art, which she fed to us instead of food. At every opportunity, she loaded 5 or 6 of us onto the subway, paying 1 fare and pushing the rest of us through the turnstiles, while the token booth clerks frowned and subway riders stared, parading us to every free event New York City offered. Festivals, zoos, parades, block parties, libraries, concerts. We walked for hours through the city, long, meandering walks that took in whole neighborhoods, which we would pass through without buying a thing or speaking to anyone. Twice a year, she marched us to the Guggenheim Dental Clinic in Manhattan for free care, where foreign dental students wearing tunics and armed with drills, picks, and no Novocaine manned a row of dental chairs and reduced each of us to a screaming mass of tears while the others waited in line, watching, horrified.
They pulled teeth like maniacs, barking at us in whatever their native tongues were, while they yanked our heads back and forth like rag dolls. They once pulled my brother Billy's tooth and then sent him out to Ma in the waiting room, whereupon she looked into the mouth full of gauze and blood and discovered they had yanked the wrong tooth. She marched back in and went wild. In summer, she was the Pied Piper, leading the whole pack of us to public swimming pools, stripping down to her one-piece bathing suit and plunging into the water like a walrus, the rest of us following her like seals, splashing and gurgling in terror behind her as Mommy flailed along, seemingly barely able to swim herself, until one of us coughed and sputtered, at which time she whipped through the water and grabbed the offending child, pulling him out and slapping him on the back, laughing. We did not consider ourselves poor or deprived or depressed, for the rules of the outside world seemed meaningless to us as children. But as we grew up and fanned out into the world as teenagers and college students, we brought the outside world home with us, and the world that Mommy had so painstakingly created began to fall apart. The 60s roared through my house like a tidal wave. My sister Helen's decision to drop out of school and run off at age 15, though she returned home 5 years later with a nursing degree and a baby girl, was the first sign of impending doom. Now the others began to act out, and the sense of justice and desire for equal rights that Mommy and my father had imparted to us began to backfire. Kind, gentle Sunday school children who had been taught to say proudly, "I am a Negro," and recite the deeds of Jackie Robinson and Paul Robeson, now turned to Malcolm X and H. Rap Brown and Martin Luther King for inspiration. Mommy was the wrong color for Black pride and Black power, which nearly rent my house in two. One by one, my elder siblings broke with her rules, coming home bearing fruits of their own confusion, which we jokingly called their revolution. An elder brother disappeared to Europe. Another sister had an affair at college and came home with a love child, fairly big news in 1967. My brother Richie got married at 18 over Mommy's objections, divorced, then entered college, and was home on summer break when he got stopped by 2 cops while walking down the street with a friend. A group of boys who were walking about 10 yards in front of Richie and his friend had ditched what appeared to be a bag of heroin as the cop car approached. The cops grouped the boys together, lined them up against a fence, and demanded to know which of them had jettisoned the bag, which later turned out to be filled with quinine, not heroin. All denied it, so the cops searched them all and found $90 of Richie's college bank loan money in his pocket. When the policeman asked him where he got the money from, he told him it was his college money and he'd forgotten he'd had it. If you knew Richie, you'd nod and say, "Uh-huh," because it was perfectly in character for him to forget he was carrying around 90 precious dollars, which was a huge sum in those days. We used to call him the mad scientist when he was little. His science experiments would nearly blow up the house because whatever he created, he'd leave it bubbling and boiling while he went to search for food, forgetting it completely. He could remember the toughest calculus formulas and had nearly perfect pitch as a musician, but he literally could not remember to put on his pants. He would play John Coltrane-type solos on his sax for hours and be dressed in a winter jacket and gym shorts the whole time. He was that kind of kid, absent-minded and very smart, and later in life he became a chemist. But to the cops, he was just another Black perpetrator with a story, and he was arrested and jailed. Mommy paced the house all night when she got the news. She showed up early at Richie's arraignment the next day and took a seat right behind the defense table. When they brought him out in handcuffs and she saw him cuffed and dirty after being in the holding pen all night, she could not contain her grief and began muttering like a crazy woman, wringing her hands. Through her reverie of mumbo-jumbo, she heard the court-appointed lawyer lean over to Richie and offer 2 words of legal advice: plead guilty. She jumped up and screamed, "Wait!" She charged past the court officers, shouting to the judge that it was a mistake, that none of her kids had ever been in trouble with the law before, that her son was a college student, and so forth. The white judge, who had noticed Mommy sitting in the largely Black courtroom, released Richie to her custody, and the charges were later dropped. but that experience made Mommy bear down on the younger ones like me even more. She was, in retrospect, quite brilliant when it came to manipulating us. She depended heavily on the king or queen system she established in our house long before I was born. The eldest sibling was the king or queen, and you could not defy them because you were a slave. When the eldest left for college, the next ascended to the throne. The king-queen system gave us a sense of order, rank, and self. It gave the elder ones the sense that they were in charge, when in actuality it was Mommy who ruled the world. It also harked back to her own traditional Orthodox upbringing, where the home was run by one dominating figure with strict rules and regulations. Despite the orchestrated chaos of our house, we always ate meals at a certain time, always did homework at a certain time, and always went to bed at a certain time. Mommy also aligned herself with any relative or friend who had any interest in any of our children, and would send us off to stay with whatever relative promised to straighten us out, and many did. The extended black family was Mommy's whole card, and she played it as often as the times demanded because her family was not available to her. As I grew up, it occurred to me at some point that we had some relatives we had never seen. "How come we don't have any aunts and uncles on your side?" I asked her one day. "I had a brother who died, and my sister, I don't know where she is." "Why not?" "We got separated." "How's that?" "I'm removed from my family." "Removed?" "Removed. Dead." "Who's dead?" "I'm dead. They're dead too by now, probably. What's the difference? They didn't want me to marry on the black side." "But if you're black already, how can they be mad at you?" Boom! I had her, but she ignored it. Don't ask me any more questions. My stepfather, a potential source of information about her background, was not helpful. "Oh, your mama, you mind her," he grunted when I asked him. He loved her. He seemed to have no problem with her being white, which I found odd, since she was clearly so different from him. Whereas he was largely easygoing and open-minded about most worldly matters, she was suspicious, strict, and inaccessible. Whenever she stepped out of the house with us, she went into a sort of mental zone, where her attention span went no farther than the 5 kids trailing her, and the tightly balled fist in which she held her small bit of money, which she always counted to the last penny. She had absolutely no interest in a world that seemed incredibly agitated by our presence. The stares and remarks, the glances and cackles that we heard as we walked about the world went right over her head, but not over mine. By age 10, I was coming into my own feelings about myself and my own impending manhood, and going out with Mommy, which had been a privilege and an honor at age 5, had become a dreaded event. I had reached a point where I was ashamed of her and didn't want the world to see my white mother. When I went out with my friends, I'd avoid telling her where we were playing because I didn't want her coming to the park to fetch me. I grew secretive, cautious, passive, angry, and fearful, always afraid that the baddest cat on the block would call her a honky, in which case I'd have to respond and get my ass kicked. "Come and let's walk to the store," she said one afternoon. "I can go by myself," I said. The intent was to hide my white mom and go it alone. "Okay," she said. She didn't seem bothered by my newfound independence. Relieved, I set off to a neighborhood grocery store. The store owner was a gruff white man who, like many of the whites in St. Albans, was on his way out as we blacks began to move in. He did not seem to like black children, and he certainly took no particular liking to or interest in me. When I got home, Mommy placed the quart of milk he sold me on the table, opened it up, and the smell of sour milk filled the room. She closed the carton and handed it to me. "Take it back and get my money back." "Do I have to?" "Take it back." It was an order. I was a little kid in my house, not a big kid who could voice opinions and sway the master. I had to take orders. I dragged myself back to the store, dreading the showdown I knew was coming. The owner glared at me when I walked in. "I have to return this," I said. "Not here," he said. "The milk is opened. I'm not taking it back." I returned home. 10 minutes later, Mommy marched into the store doing her mad walk, the bow-legged strut that meant thunder and lightning was coming, body pitched forward, jaw jutted out, hands balled into tight fists, nose red, stomping like Cab Calloway with the Billy Eckstine band blowing full blast behind him. I followed her sheepishly. My plan to go it alone and hide my white mother, now completely awash, backfired in the worst way. She angrily placed the milk on the counter. The merchant looked at her, then at me, then back at her, then at me again. The surprise written on his face changed to anger and disgust, and it took me completely by surprise. I thought the man would see Ma, think they had something in common, then give her the dough and we'd be off. "That milk is sold," he said. "Smell it," Ma said. "It's spoiled." "I don't smell milk, I sell milk." Right away, they were at each other, I mean really going at it. A crowd of black kids gathered, watching my white mother arguing with this white man. I wanted to sink into the floor and disappear. "It's okay, Ma," I said. She ignored me. In matters of money, of which she had so little, I knew it was useless. She was going full blast, full think you are, idiot, her words flying together like gibberish, while the neighborhood kids howled, woofing like dogs and enjoying the show. After a while, it was clear the man was not going to return her money, so she grabbed my hand and was heading toward the door when he made another remark, something that I missed, something he murmured beneath his breath so softly that I couldn't hear, but it made the crowd murmur, "Ooh." Ma stiffened. Still holding the milk in her right hand, she turned around and flung it at him like a football. He ducked, and the milk missed him, smashing into the cigarette cabinet behind him and sending milk and cigarettes splattering everywhere. I could not understand such anger. I could not understand why she didn't just give up the milk. Why cause a fuss, I thought. My own embarrassment overrode all other feelings. As I walked home, holding Mommy's hand while she fumed, I thought it would be easier if we were just one color, black or white. I didn't want to be white. My siblings had already instilled the notion of black pride in me. I would have preferred that Mommy were black. Now, as a grown man, I feel privileged to have come from two worlds. My view of the world is not merely that of a black man, but of a black man with something of a Jewish soul. I don't consider myself Jewish, but when I look at Holocaust photographs of Jewish women whose children have been wrenched from them by Nazi soldiers, the women look like my own mother, and I think to myself, there but for the grace of God goes my own mother, and by extension, myself. When I see two little Jewish old ladies giggling over coffee at a Manhattan diner, it makes me smile, because I hear my own mother's laughter beneath theirs. Conversely, when I hear black leaders talking about Jewish slave owners, I feel angry and disgusted, knowing that they're inflaming people with lies and twisted history, as if all 7 of the Jewish slave owners in the antebellum South, or however few there were, are responsible for the problems of African Americans now. Those leaders are no better than their Jewish counterparts, who spin statistics in marvelous ways to make African Americans look like savages, criminals, drags on society, and animals, a word quite popular when used to describe blacks these days. I don't belong to any of those groups. I belong to the world of one God, one people. But as a kid, I preferred the black side, and often wished that Mommy had sent me to black schools like my friends. Instead, I was stuck at that white school, PS 138, with white classmates who were convinced I could dance like James Brown. They constantly badgered me to do the James Brown for them, a squiggling of the feet made famous by the godfather of soul himself, who, back in the 60s, was bigger than life. I tried to explain to them that I couldn't dance. I have always been one of the worst dancers that God has ever put upon this earth. My sisters would spend hours at home trying out new dances to Archie Bell and the Drells, Martha Reeves, King Curtis, Curtis Mayfield, Aretha Franklin, and the Spinners. "Come on and dance," they'd shout, boogieing across the room. Even Ma would join in, sashaying across the floor. But when I joined in, I looked so odd and stupid they fell to the floor laughing. "Give it up," they said. "You can't dance." The white kids in school did not believe me, and after weeks of encouragement, I found myself standing in front of the classroom on Talon Day, wearing my brother's good shoes and hitching up my pants, soul singer style like one of the Temptations, as someone dropped the needle on a James Brown record. I slid around the way I'd seen him do, shouting, "Oh, Shabana!" They were delighted. Even the teacher was amused. They really believed I could dance. I had them fooled. They screamed for more, and I obliged, squiggling my feet and slip-sliding across the wooden floor, jumping into the air and landing in a near split by the blackboard, shouting, "Ee-yow!" They went wild. But even as I sat down with their applause ringing in my ears, with laughter on my face, happy to feel accepted, to be part of them, knowing I had pleased them, I saw the derision on their faces, the clever smiles, laughing at the oddity of it, and I felt the same ache I felt when I gazed at the boy in the mirror. I remembered him, and I hated him even more.